This is the Joe Gaither Show on BamaCentral.com.
Good afternoon, Tuscaloosa, Internet World, West Alabama. How we doing today on this Monday? Thanks, everybody, for jumping in and joining us on the Joe Gaither Show on Bama Central. BamaCentral.com. You're checking us out on the Bama Central YouTube channel. You're watching me on our own social media machines at Joe Gaither 6 on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Or you might be listening to us, and we love you so much if you are listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon. You can always find the Joe Gaither Show on Bama Central wherever you find your favorite podcasts. We are back live last week of July. Had a lot of fun the last couple of weeks going to Dallas for SEC Media Days. I stepped out of town for just a moment last week, but we're ready to really get the new year started. About 5 minutes ago, we got our little schedule from Alabama football. We're going to see Alabama football practice 7, 8, 9 times this fall for fall camp. So can't wait to get that started on Wednesday. But today, and for today's episode, we are going to do part two. Part two with our friend Blake Byler. He's been working on Alabama basketball's newcomer series. You can read it right now at BamaCentral.com. Alabama Crimson Tide on SI, powered by Bama Central. It's just right there under the basketball tab. He's got all 8 done. We did part number 1 with the 4 transfers, and now we are going to bring him on to talk about part number 2 and the 4 freshmen. And really, we'll talk about a conversation that he had with Alabama assistant coach Preston Murphy. And we'll talk about a hiring that happened minutes after part number 1 with Brian Adams. Brian Adams becoming the 3rd Alabama assistant basketball coach roughly a month ago when we finished up our conversation, part number 1. So that just means that there will be some basketball news that happens after we hit in today. But before we bring on Blake Byler, we want to give a big thanks to our friend Derek Daniel. You can call him today at 205-758-3391 for all of your insurance needs. Everybody needs home, life, and auto insurance. You got to make sure that you are taken care of for all of life's needs, especially if you're driving in the great city of Tuscaloosa. All the kids are about to be coming back in from out of state, so you want to make sure that your auto insurance is up to date. You're properly covered with the right coverages. You can call Derek Daniel today at 205-758-3391. They can give you a very quick auto insurance quote, let you know if you are properly covered. If you need to up your coverage, Derek Daniel and his team at State Farm can take care of you at 4604 Highway 69 North in Northport, Alabama, 35473. And we thank Derek Daniel so much for being a part of the program. With that in mind, let's find our friend Blake Byler. Blake Byler, you follow him on the Twitter machine already at Blake Byler 45, our lead basketball writer for us at BamaCentral.com. Blake, it's been about a month, man. You've been busy writing about these freshmen. How have you been, and are you ready for the start of the new academic calendar?
Yeah, I've been good, Joe. I mean, just thinking the same thing that you were talking about earlier. Excited to get kind of into this new athletics calendar, this new season. It's exciting getting the fall camp schedule and everything kind of ready to get started. The summer's been good, but it's I think it's about time we get some live coverage going and some sports going. So really excited for that to kind of start up here this week.
Well, you actually got a little blessing in terms of coverage, live coverage of 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, our man Darian Reed. And why don't we start with Darian Reed? You wrote down all 4 Alabama freshmen, incoming freshmen, Darian Reed, Aiden Sherrill, LeBaron Philon, and Naz Cunningham. Naz or Nas? How are you pronouncing it?
Nas.
Perfect. Okay. Well, so we're going to start with the headliner, Darian Reed. He was competing live for Team USA. What is it? U18, U17 FIBA basketball championships. So let's just start with that. Your takeaways from Darian Reed playing for Team USA. What you saw with that team. What does it mean to have him selected, Alabama basketball player selected for that team? And really just how did that help you get through your summer lull?
Yeah, I think that kind of showed the level that he is thought of by his peers and the level that he is respected as a prospect when it comes to his overall game. And he doesn't have like the flashiest game. Like he's not he's not Brandon Miller. Like, he's not going to shoot 5-6 threes a game. He's not really a flashy offensive player necessarily, but he does a lot of little things at a very, very high level. He's a very good defender. He showed during the FIBA, the exhibition, the games that he was playing in, that he's a very good rebounder. He's a good offensive rebounder. He hustles really well, and just everything he did playing for Team USA just kind of affected the team in a positive way. He didn't go and put up 25 points a game, and he didn't go and shoot 7-8 threes. But what he did do is he scored around 10 points. He got to the free throw line. He cut well. He finished well. He rebounded the ball really well, both offensively and defensively. And that kind of showed what he can be and the kind of role he'll play at Alabama, because I think they'll be somewhat similar, because in both situations, he wasn't the star necessarily of that Team USA team. And he's not going to be the star of this Alabama team. Now, he is the highest ranked recruit, the highest profile recruit on the roster. And he's currently the only player projected to be a first-round pick in the 2025 NBA draft. But I still think with the amount of experience and scoring talent on this Alabama team, he's not going to be your number one scorer. He's probably not going to be a top 3, maybe even top 4 scorer. But the ways that he can affect the game are at such a high level that he's going to be a guy that gets looks for the next level. Everything I've heard about Reed is that he's extremely coachable. He looks for all of the little things that he can do well to affect the team, to affect winning. And he does those at a high level. Like I said earlier, great defender, great rebounder, and those all showed in his stats for Team USA. And I think that's also kind of going to be the role that he's able to play for Alabama. I'm not sure if he is going to start off the bat necessarily. It kind of depends on how he adjusts. He's got good size, a 6'8", 220-pound wing. So that's really good size, especially as a defender on the perimeter. So I think he has a chance to earn a starting spot. It won't be given to him by any means with the amount of experience that's on this Alabama team. But still, he's going to be able to affect the game in a lot of positive ways. And I think that kind of role is what he's going to play in his freshman year at Alabama.
All right, so I want to keep going with this same little topic right here. We're talking with Blake Byler, and you mentioned and you wrote about it in your profile picture of Darian Reed on BamaCentral.com that he is higher rated than Brandon Miller. He's higher rated than several players, than Kyra Lewis, than Hendricks and Richard Hendricks. So he's really higher rated recruit than so many great Alabama basketball players in the past. But going off of what you just talked about, not really going to be taking a lot of three-point shots, maybe not going to be the superstar. Will that be difficult for the Alabama fan base to really digest as, okay, we've got this 5-star, he's, McDonald's All-American, might be a one and done, but he's not the guy. He's not. We all remember Brandon Miller about midway through that December started to really take over. And same thing, Colin Sexton took Alabama to the NCAA tournament, running down the court against Texas A&M. And you've got a lot of one and dones or highly rated recruits in the Nate Oates era. I mean, Josh Primo wasn't really the star on this team or on his team. What was it, 2020, 2019? How will the fan base really accept and digest Darian Reed being, okay, he's supposed to be highly rated, but maybe he isn't doing the obvious thing that affects winning? There's some underlying things that he does that's more helpful. Well, how do you think that will play out this year?
I think it'll be fairly easy to digest because number 1 is back and number 2 is back, and he changed his number to number 4. When you have Mark Sears and Grant Nelson, both of two of arguably the best players on last year's team, coming back as fifth-year seniors, it's pretty easy to not get too worried about what the production of the freshmen are, because you don't have those gaps that they have to fill. In 2023, Brandon Miller's season, if he wasn't scoring the way that he did, that team was going to struggle. And that team did struggle when he had poor games. They were still able to win a couple because they were a really good team. But when he struggled, it was noticeable. But Darian Reed isn't a 25-point-a-game as a freshman guy. And Alabama has a returning 22-point-a-game scorer. So there's there's not really a need and there's not really a void for him to fill in that manner. There's not an expectation. There aren't those heavy responsibilities that are going to be laid on him, which I think is a good thing. I don't think it's not always good to have to rely on freshmen to do that. Now, when you got a guy as talented as Brandon Miller, yeah, let him go to work. But you don't have to have that out of Reed. And that's not to say he's not going to score either. I think he's going to score more than 6 to 8 points a game. Like, he's a very, very talented inside scorer. He's a great cutter. He's incredibly athletic. He's going to put up a lot of highlight reel dunks and everything. Like, he's going to have moments where he looks like you understand why he's the 5-star recruit that he is. It's just the team is so stacked that he doesn't have to be the guy, and that's not going to be asked of him.
So on that same track, will that hinder his NBA potential, his one-and-done potential, or will the scouts in attendance and people talking to Nate Oates and people going to practices realize really what his ceiling can be, even if he's not asked to maybe carry a lion's share of the load this year for Alabama?
You know, I really don't think so. And I think we really have a good example of that in this past NBA draft with Stephon Castle out of UConn. He was not the leading scorer for UConn's team. He wasn't the second leading scorer. He was a freshman that cracked the starting lineup of an all-senior group. So there were 4 seniors in him. And he did what was asked of him by Dan Hurley. He played really solid defense. He hit the occasional 3, especially against Alabama in the Final Four. He handled the ball. He played guard. He played wing. He did what was needed of him, and he flashed his potential by playing his role. And I think that's really attractive to NBA scouts, as a guy who isn't demanding the ball, isn't overshooting or anything like that. He's just playing what's assigned to him and making things happen in the role he's supposed to play on the team. And I don't think you have to put up gaudy numbers in order to get drafted in the first round. You even saw with Alabama, the year Brandon Miller got drafted, Noah Clowney also went in the later end of the first round, and he averaged single digits as a freshman. But as a freshman, he was able to show what he could do in his role. And NBA scouts saw that, saw his body type, saw his play style, and said that projects well to the NBA. Let's go ahead and take a swing on that. And so I think that's kind of the same thing that you could see out of Darion Reed, especially if, one, he knocks down the 3 well enough and defends well enough to find his way in the starting lineup. Like, if he is a starter caliber player on this team, which I think he absolutely has the potential to be, 1, this team's going to be really good. And 2, he absolutely has a chance to get drafted first round or whatever because of his ability to maximize himself within that role on a really good basketball team.
You've talked about his ability to defend and his physicality for freshmen, and really his ability around the rim. What would you say is his biggest weakness? I'm hearing maybe from you and reading a little bit in your profile piece that it might be his shooting from range. And if it is shooting from the 3-point range, what will that hurdle be like for Darion Reed to overcome in the Nate Oates system?
I would say that's probably the biggest weakness of his offensive game, other than maybe, like, I wouldn't against like a point guard because you have point guards for that. But as far as things that's going to be asked of him, he's a decent shooter. I wouldn't say he's a bad shooter. I think it was during EYBL or maybe it was high school last season. He was shooting in the mid 30s, which isn't bad. He's done it on low volume. So he's not a guy that's shooting 5-6 threes a game. He's shooting 1 or 2 and making one of them. You know what I mean? So it's more of a lack of volume. And so at Alabama, he's going to get open looks and he's going to be asked to shoot them. And as long as he's not shooting 25%, Oates is going to tell him to shoot open looks. And even if he's shooting 25%, Oates will still probably tell him the open looks. Now we have seen a couple clips of practice and he hit, I think it was a step back 3 on somebody in practice. And he's a high level basketball player, so he has the ability to make those shots. It's just if he can find consistency doing so, going up a level from high school to college. And if he is able to, it's going to unlock even more of his game, and it's going to unlock more of Alabama's potential, his pro potential. It would all benefit from him finding more consistency with that outside shot, but I would say that's definitely the biggest work in progress of his game as it stands right now.
We're hanging out with Blake Byler, BamaCentral's basketball expert, and he just finished up his summer project, Alabama newcomer spotlights, breakdowns. We've just hit Darian Reed. Let's move to the teammate, Aiden Sherrill. And your first paragraph reads, while he's not the highest player, in Alabama basketball's number 2 ranked recruiting class, Aiden Sherrill may be one of the most seamless fits Nate Oates has ever recruited into his system. I'd just like you to take that line and tell us what you see in Aiden Sherrill that makes him one of the most seamless fits Nate Oates has ever seen in his system.
Yeah, so he's 6'11", and he's roughly 240 pounds after some strength training to start this summer. And he's a big who can rebound the ball, and he can stretch the floor. And he is a really good shooter from outside. And so to have a true 5-man, he can play the 4 or the 5, but to have a guy who's really able to play the 5, he's a pretty good shot blocker, he's a good rebounder, and for him to be able to step out to the 3-point line and be a knockdown shooter from 3, there's not much more you could want if you're Alabama and you're looking for a center to play in your system. And that's he's been a good shooter all of his high school career, and he's improved every single year. And so kind of projecting forward, it's going to be a little hard to see him getting starter caliber minutes as a freshman because Cliff Amore is there, the transfer from Rutgers, who is probably the best shot blocker in the country, if not one of, and is a 5th-year senior, has lots of experience, and fantastic rebounder. We've talked about Cliff on this show before. We know how good we think he's going to be. So with him already in the fold, there's not really a starting center position for Sherrill. But he has the chance to develop and become a perfect fit at center in this Alabama offense. And as his defense improves as well, he could be a really special player. I think just the way that he projects, like with his frame, he's incredibly long. We don't have wingspan measurements on the Alabama roster, but from seeing pictures of him, it looks like over a 7-foot wingspan, really, really long arms. So he's going to have really good range. But I honestly think it's good that he's going to be able to play maybe 15 to 18 minutes as a freshman and be able to get acclimated, because there is one of the biggest issues, or not issues, but concerns about him is whenever you have a guy that size coming out of high school, it's how raw they are, and how they aren't adjusted to playing maybe as big as they are. They aren't adjusted to playing against guys that weigh as much or that are as strong as they are in the SEC. So for him to have a year not only learning from a really good shot blocker and Amore, but also get to adjust over time to that SEC physicality and the high level college basketball pace and everything like that. As he adjusts to that, he can be a really good player because of the skill set that he has. He's a really skilled big. And so when you put a skilled big in Alabama's offense and you can play 5 out with all of that spacing, it's going to make something that maximizes Alabama's offense and something that maximizes him as a player. And so I don't necessarily think it'll be this year where he pops the most. But as he continues to get stronger, to adjust to high-level college basketball, and if he can continue shooting well once he gets to college and starts playing real games, he's going to be really good. And he has the chance to end up being a potential NBA pick or something way down the line.
All right, so let's take a maybe worst-case scenario for Alabama. You've got Cliff Amore and you got Grant Nelson playing the 4, the 5, kind of interchangeable there. Let's say one of those guys has a bad night or something bad befalls them. Okay, you've turned an ankle, you've jammed a thumb, or you've got yourself suspended for a game, as sometimes SEC games happen. How ready do you think Aiden Sherrill is to step in and say, okay, maybe not full-time minutes. We got Cliff Amore, you got Grant Nelson for that. But on tonight, a random Tuesday night in the SEC, a random Wednesday night in the SEC, I can step in here and I can hold down the fort, in January, in February, and keep things working. Do we see Aiden Sherrill as a player that, okay, well, I hear you talk about his raw abilities, that, okay, in a couple of months, he's going to be ready to answer the bell when called upon?
I think he can be. It's just a matter of what we see from his growth and development once the season starts, because there's a lot of basketball that still needs to be played. I think it's good that he's not the one Alabama's relying on at the center position. And I think if he was, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. He's a really talented player. But when you're talking about a team that has Final Four and national championship aspirations, you'd rather have an established player. And that's why they went in the portal, and that's why they went and got Cliff Omori. So having Sherrill is going to be good to have that depth. And I think he's going to be definitely something that's really hard on opposing teams whenever, great, we got 2 fouls on Omori in the first 5 minutes. Oh, here comes their 5-star big off the bench who's going to shoot threes and spread us out and light us up. Like that. That's the kind of depth that Alabama has. And not even mentioning Jaron Stevenson, who was a potential fringe draft prospect this past year, put weight on, added some more aspects to his game. So with Jaron Stevenson in the fold too, you've got 4 really good bigs that can all, no matter who's in foul trouble, no matter who's playing good or bad on a given night, you can mix and match the 4 of them in those power forward and center spots and get a really good lineup. So Alabama's going to have way more depth in the front court than they had last year, really than they've had in a really long time, considering the quality of player and the ability of the respective players at both positions. I really can't think of a time where Alabama's had 4 bigs that have been this talented and this good, where all of them could be, where you have Omori and Nelson, who could be potential all-conference level players. They might be, might not be, depends on, they could be hindered by the loaded roster, everything like that. But talent-wise, potential all-conference players. And then behind them, you have 2 guys who down the line are looked at as potential draft prospects. So that kind of depth in the front court is going to be huge for Alabama, especially in an area where they struggled a whole lot last year whenever Grant Nelson got in foul trouble and then they were kind of stuck. So it's going to be very different and a very, honestly, good problem to have for Oates to try to figure out how to give minutes to all these bigs. But when one goes down, like you were mentioning earlier, they're going to have guys that are able to step up. And I think the limited playing time will help him rather than just getting thrown into the fire like that's happened with some freshmen in the past.
What do we make of the teammate aspect between Darian Reed and Aiden Sherrill? Playing last year at Prolific Prep out in California, is it just a added bonus to our 2 freshmen, or will it really be something tangible that can help these players assimilate to college in their first year?
I'd say it's an added bonus. I mean, I've talked to some people about practice, and they've said that there are moments where you're like, oh yeah, those guys have obviously played together. They play like a wing, like a forward/wing and a center aren't going to be able to showcase the same chemistry that a guard and a center would, or 2 guards would, because it's kind of 2 differing roles, I would say, where they aren't doing as much. But whenever you have them in a pick and roll with each other and one throws a lob to the other, like you can see and people have said they've seen the aspects of former teammates. But if anything, more than just on the court, that helps in the locker room, because you've got 2 guys who are already really close, and you've got a group of new freshmen and transfers and a team that you're trying to gel together and get to be really close. When you've already got 2 guys that know each other and that are teammates, that's going to help bring the locker room together even more. So I think even off the court, it's as much of a positive and on the bench and everything like that as it is on the court with their play and how they bounce off of each other that way.
Let's keep rolling here with Alabama's basketball newcomer series. We're talking to Blake Byler, BamaCentral's basketball expert, and he's now finished his newcomer series. You can read each one of the profiles right there at BamaCentral.com. Blake, was LeBaron Philon Rylan Griffin's last gift to Alabama?
You can put it like that, because he, as Rylan Griffin left in the transfer portal and committed, Philon requested out of his letter of intent. couple weeks, if it was even a couple weeks, maybe a week later, he's committed to Alabama and now he's on campus. And so I think you could put it like that it was Rylan Griffin's last gift. But I think Philon is a very unique prospect and someone that people didn't really expect to be having the impact that he's already having in practice. And from people that I've talked to that have been in practice and seen practice, he is an absolute bulldog defensively. And that is something that Alabama has sorely needed from the guard position. He's got great size. He's 6'4". He's right under 200 pounds, I think, maybe 185, 190. And so with that kind of size, he's an ultra competitor, and everything he does, whether it's drills, whether it's one-on-ones, whether it's 5-on-5s, whatever it is, he hates to lose, and he is playing 100% at all times. And I think that's been really good on guys like Mark Sears, who are coming back as an All-American, maybe really easy to kind of not find a challenge in practice. You've got guys who you've played against before, but Philon is a guy who's frustrating Sears in practice. He's a guy who is making all of the other guards better, and the effort that he plays with isn't going unnoticed, and it's something that could very easily earn him playing time. Now, when you look at the guard room, there's a lot of players that need to get playing time. Obviously, you have Sears and you have Latrell Wrightsell, but then apart from that, you have Aiden Holloway from Auburn, who we've talked about on here before. You have Houston Millette from Pepperdine. You have Chris Youngblood from USF, who I think is a starter caliber player. So there's not enough room necessarily for him to walk in and take a starting spot. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think the way that he plays and the mentality that he plays with is going to earn him minutes, whether it be a couple a game or a larger role, or there be a game where he takes over. I don't think he's going to be sitting on the bench the entire game. He just does too much to affect the game to do that. Now, he's also, aside from just the effort and the mentality, he's a good basketball player. He gets downhill. He finishes really well. He's quick as lightning first step. And he's also a really solid shooter. And whenever he's an in-state kid. He went to Baker High School down in Mobile. But for his senior year, in his junior year, I think he averaged 35 points a game and was the 7A State Player of the Year. After that, he transferred to Link Academy in Missouri. And I think that transfer up a level where he was playing schools like Prolific Prep. He had a nationally televised game against two of his now teammates with Reed and Sherelle, and teams like that, IMG Academy, Montverde, all of those kind of big prep schools, playing those versus playing, Vestavia and Hoover and like good schools for Alabama high school basketball. It's not the same level of competition as playing prep schools all the time. Right. I think that was really big for his growth and also really big for his maturity and his ability to find a way to impact the game. And I think he's going to be a guy that can earn minutes early with his mentality and with his competitiveness and his willingness to play defense on top of his skill level that he already has.
Can we just file him under an Alabama in-state player? I know he transferred to Link Academy up there in Missouri, but really he was the number one player in the state of Alabama in his class, committed to Auburn, decommitted, was flirting with Ole Miss, moves up to Missouri. I don't know. Maybe it's a little too myopic for me, but I'm basically written down in my notes, in-state kid.
Yeah, I would consider him an in-state kid. He grew up and played until he was 17 in Alabama. And on his hometown on the roster, he lists Mobile. I think when it comes to how you classify guys, it's like where they consider their hometown and where they're a product of. For example, Reed and Sherelle both played at Prolific out in California, but respectively, they list their hometowns as being in Georgia and Detroit because that's where they're from and where they played up until they transferred to play prep and really improve their game. So yeah, he's an in-state kid. That makes 3 in-state players on this basketball team with him, with Mark Sears from Muscle Shoals, and with Chris Youngblood from Tuscaloosa. And he didn't play high school basketball in Tuscaloosa. He played in Georgia, but he claims Tuscaloosa as his hometown. So you've got three in-state guys on this team, which is, I think, the most you've had since Herb and Alex Reese and Kyra Lewis and Petty were all on the roster. So you've definitely got a strong Alabama contingent on this roster, and Filan's a big part of that.
I definitely love the contingent of Herb Jones and Alex Reese and Kyra Lewis. Before we hear about Nas Cunningham, though, Blake, let me put a timeout on you and tell everybody about the most reliable residential roof replacement company in Alabama and Mississippi, Purple Turtle Roofing. Whether it's addressing leaks, storm damage, or general wear and tear, Purple Turtle Roofing is going to be there to deliver exceptional roof repair for your property. Purple Turtle Roofing is the leading expert in local residential roofing solutions, specializing in providing unparalleled service and quality craftsmanship for all your roof replacement needs. Call Dustin Foley and his team today at 877-PT-ROOF-5 for your free roof inspection. That's 877-787-6635 to schedule your appointment, and one of their qualified employees will come check out your roof for free, and they'll make sure that you're prepared for any and all of life's storms. You can visit them online today at www.roofturtle.com. All right, let's finish it up with the Alabama basketball newcomer series with Nas Cunningham. And Nas Cunningham, you're right, correctly, he was at one point considered the number one player in this class. And now, as we kind of look at the four-man class, maybe he's considered the fourth best player in this class. So I'm going to tell you, my immediate mind goes to Chris Parker from last season. And so I'm inviting correction from Blake Byler, our basketball expert. Do we see Chris Parker in Nas Cunningham? Does he have the same fate in front of him, redshirting, and then we'll see? Or am I completely off base? What do we see in Nas Cunningham, and what will his contribution be to this year's Alabama basketball season?
I think there's a lot of similarities. One, they have a similar build. They're both roughly 6'8". They're both guards. I think play style, they're a little different, but also one other way that they're different is their recruiting ranking. And Chris Parker was outside the top 100, whereas Nas Cunningham is still a top 50 player. And so to think that, the way that this Alabama class and this roster has shaken out, I don't think it's unfair to assume that he's probably the 13th man, but he's still a top 50 recruit, and probably 6-7 years ago, he would have been the number one recruit for Alabama in the class. That's just how talented this basketball team is. Excuse me. And I think the interesting thing about Cunningham is he was ranked so high so early, and a lot of that came off of his size and his skill set. He's a really good shooter. He can handle the ball, and he's really athletic, and the skill that he has as a player kind of makes him stand out, especially early. Coughing a little bit here. Sorry.
It's all right. It's all good.
But the way that, early on in his career, he stood out, and then over time, a lot of his peers kind of surpassed him, especially in these recruiting rankings. And I think one thing that was interesting was he went and played at Overtime Elite. And instead of going and playing for like a prep school or something like that, he went and played for this league in Atlanta for kind of 20-ish and under players. And I personally don't think it's the best league ever. I don't think it's the most talented. But as he grew and as his peers grew around him, the thing he really struggled with was consistency, where he showed all these flashes early where teams were like, yes, or scouts were like, yes, this guy is going to be great. Rank him number one. He's got all this potential, which I still think he does. I think he's got a lot of raw talent, and that comes from being a 6'7", really good shooter, a good shot maker. But I just think consistency wise, it wasn't all there as he continued to develop. I don't think he can't get there. I definitely think he can, especially with coming to Alabama, a place that's really good at player development. You've seen what Oates has done with a lot of these players, turning them into NBA caliber players. But I think it's hard to find somewhere for him to get minutes early on because he plays wing. There are big guard wing. There are a lot of guys that can play that on this roster. You look at Chris Youngblood, Houston Millette. You slide down to the 3. You've got Darion Reed. You've still got Mo Diabate, who's back from last year and is a really good defender. I don't think strength-wise Cunningham's there yet. He's really, really skinny and a player that needs to put on a lot of weight to be able to be a high-level contributor. But I think the way the roster shakes out, he's just lower on the totem pole. But even then, he's a top 50 recruit. So he's still a really good basketball player. He still has a ton of raw talent. He still has a lot of potential that can be tapped into. It's just going to be hard for him to see the floor in year one. Now, your question of is he going to redshirt? Is he going to transfer? Is he going to follow the Chris Parker route? I don't know. I don't know if he's going to redshirt. We haven't really heard or seen anything about that yet. I think it's possible if Oates sees that he's not going to play and there's no way that he can really find minutes, he might suggest redshirting, being like, hey, you can save this year of eligibility if you just be a practice guy for us this year. But regardless, I think Alabama's a really good fit for him because of his skill set. Being such a long-rangey defender, someone that's the type that Oates really likes to utilize defensively, as well as being a good shooter, being an athletic player. I think he fits well in the system. It's just a matter of when he is able to put that weight on, adjust to the college game, and really find ways to make an impact. So I don't see it this year. I could be wrong. He could be the 6th man for all I know, and he could pop and be that guy. But as the way with how I'm seeing the roster and the way it's currently constructed, he's probably in the last 1 or 2 guys on the bench, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have a ton of talent and might have been the most talented player on an Alabama roster a couple of not too long ago.
Well, we've been having a lot of fun with Blake Byler, looking at the newcomer breakdowns. But you also put a piece on BamaCentral.com up today. You have the cover featuring your discussion with Alabama's lead recruiter, Alabama's assistant coach, Preston Murphy. So Preston Murphy was really behind this recruiting class and the episode prior that we did together, behind the transfer portal class. So we want to encourage everybody to read about Blake's conversation with Preston Murphy. But I want to ask just a couple of questions about the conversation, about your time with him. You wrote about Murphy's relationship with the head coach and really that being kind of where things started as far as recruitment goes. Okay, we're recruiting Billy basketball player, and I want to leverage my relationship with the head coach you're going to be playing for and the style that he plays for, obviously Nate Oates in this case. What do you make of Preston Murphy and his relationship with Nate Oates? He talked a lot in your article about competitiveness and the spirit that they kind of have in their coaching room. Just what kind of insight did you get from Preston Murphy on his relationship with Nate Oates and how that helps him on the recruiting trail?
I think there's a lot of camaraderie between Oates and Murphy. I think they're good friends. I think the competitiveness that they share and that the entire kind of facility and the team and the staff and everyone shares really helps them when it comes to game day. But on the recruiting trail, I think that Murphy is able to use not only his own wealth of basketball knowledge that he has. I mean, he worked under Dan Hurley at Rhode Island. He worked under Greg McDermott at Creighton. He was coached by a number of really good coaches, and now he's working for Nate Oates, who's another one of the best coaches in the country. So he has the experience and the knowledge that he's acquired over the years of a lot of really good basketball coaches. And he says that his approach to recruiting is basketball driven. It's basketball first. He wants to help whoever it is that he's recruiting become the best player that they can be. And he believes that they can do that at Alabama. And he believes that Oates and his NBA system can help that. And so whenever they're recruiting, they find guys who have NBA aspirations. They find guys who want to play basketball a certain way, a very modern way, a very NBA-like way. And whenever those two things match up, Murphy comes to them and he wants to help them improve. He wants to focus on player development. And I think, honestly, that's a great way to approach recruiting in modern day college basketball. Is we can help you get where you want to be. And Alabama has kind of the reputation under Nate Oates to be able to back that up. I mean, if you walk into the practice facility, you look up on the rafters and you have banners of players that are currently in the NBA hanging. First-round picks, second-round picks, guys who are contributing at the highest level in the best basketball league in the world because they went through Alabama to get there. And so having that basketball-first approach, I think, really helps. And also, he's great at relationships. He gets along well with the players, gets along with their families, and has become one of the most respected individuals on the recruiting trail as an assistant coach. 24/7 does a ranking of recruiters based on the classes that they bring in. And Preston Murphy ranked number 2 in this past cycle, coinciding with Alabama's number 2 ranked recruiting class. But he has quickly gained a reputation in just a year or so at Alabama that he is one of the best recruiters in the country, and that if he and Nate Oates are both going after a guy, it's going to be really hard to fend them off with how attractive the system is, with how attractive the success is, and everything else that goes into that and how those players can develop.
How important do you think the formula is, the coaching staff? And we're going to talk about Brian Adams here in just a moment. But really the staff, I mean, you look at the previous staff before you lost Coach Hodgson and Coach Petway and Coach Henry. All three of those guys had pretty much defined roles. And then you fast forward it to the current staff. Coach Murphy recruiting. You've got Pannone on offense, and now Brian Adams on defense. Just how important do you think the formula is that, okay, here's my 3 guys, here's the 3 areas they're in charge of, and I'm going to, I being Nate Oates, going to overlap in all 3 areas. Obviously, it's worked out at Alabama so far, but just going into 2024-25 with second year of Preston Murphy, now to be first year of Brian Adams, do you think it's the formula, or do you think it's the personnel themselves?
I think Oates has an idea of how he wants to run it, but he has to find the people to do so. And I think he's done that with this current staff. I think he did so with the last staff as well. But these guys complement each other really, really well. Obviously, they're all basketball people, and they're all basketball first people, and they love the game. They're all ultra competitive, like I talked about earlier. But you've got Murphy, who's very relational, very player development focused, and he's a guy who's a great recruiter, fits that role very well. Ryan Pannone, absolute menace when it comes to X's and O's, especially offensively, sets, everything. Go look at his Twitter. You can see he's tweeting at 4:30 in the morning about X elevator doors set from some Israeli league. Like, it's crazy the number or the amount of time he pours into film, and that obsession carries over into Alabama having a successful offense and having successful schemes. And now you bring Brian Adams into the fold, who is a more defensive coach, which Alabama hasn't had since Charlie Henry, and they both have similar backgrounds in that they were both once G League head coaches. Charlie Henry was at the Chicago Bulls G League team. Brian Adams came from the Pistons as an assistant. Before that, he was the Clippers G League team head coach. And so he has head coaching experience with high-level basketball players. He's coached in different leagues all over the world. He's an NBA mind. He's been in an NBA locker room and an NBA system. And so with him being an X's and O's defensive-minded coach, you now have a guy who can plug into that role. And I think Alabama's defense struggled a decent bit at the beginning of last season whenever you had a new staff and they didn't necessarily have defined roles. Nate Oates even told us later in the season that the guys had kind of shuffled around who was doing what. And I think at the beginning of the season, Pannone was doing some defense, and I think he shifted back over to offense. Nate Oates was doing more defense. But now you've got a clearly defined role for all three of the assistants. You've got Oates overseeing it. On paper, it looks like it's going to work very well, bringing Adams into the fold. And Murphy said that he's met Adams. He hasn't been around a whole lot yet, hasn't moved totally over yet, but has really enjoyed the time that he's gotten to spend with him, thinks he's going to be a great addition. Obviously, Oates thinks highly of him or he wouldn't have hired him. And you've got, I think, a really well-constructed staff that's going to be able to bounce off each other in a lot of different ways, whether that be schematically or player development, recruiting. All of it, I think, is all going to tie together very well.
All right, let's round up this whole segment with Blake Byler by wrapping it back together with Brian Adams. You opened up the Preston Murphy discussion by talking about being player focused and getting guys to the NBA and really Alabama being one of the premier places, honestly, one of the premier places to stick you from high school basketball into the NBA. Well, we've seen now Ryan Pannone hiring from the Pelican system, and you've taken now Brian Adams from the Pistons and Clippers system. I just like to ask you to wrap up Brian Adams by kind of encapsulating how his hire really furthers Nate Oates' mission that he wants to be, you write about it, the 31st NBA franchise. What else do we know about Brian Adams, and how does his hire help Nate Oates really further the program as far as being NBA light?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of instills more of the values and the styles and even the systems and the day-to-day aspects of an NBA organization. That brings another NBA mind into the fold that adds to, like you said, Nate Oates' goal of running an NBA system. And he'll openly talk about it. He says, we want to run an NBA system. We want everything that we do to mimic the NBA because that's where they want to get their players. And that whole 31st NBA team was a quote from Ryan Pannone, who said that whenever he was figuring out whether to take the Alabama job, whether to stay with the Pelicans, David Griffin, an executive of the New Orleans Pelicans, said that they consider Alabama the 31st NBA team because of the way that they run things. And it's not just because they shoot a lot of threes and they shoot a lot of threes in the NBA. It's everything from the analytics that they track, from the way that they track their practices. It all mimics the way that NBA organizations are run. And Alabama's doing the most they can at a college level to try to mimic that. And I think bringing Adams into the fold helps that even more. Like I said earlier, brings in another NBA mind. And so now you've got your two main X's and O's assistants, both on the offensive and defensive side of the floor, both being from the NBA. So I think that's going to help a lot. And then you've just got a room full of guys that want to learn from each other, want to implement things to make it run as smoothly as possible. And I think you're going to get a well-oiled machine out of it, and one that continues to be very NBA-like in the way that it has been. And I think Adams, like you said, just kind of perpetuates that even more.
He's Blake Byler. He's BamaCentral's basketball expert, and he just finished up his summer newcomer series, breaking down Alabama's newcomers. We appreciate your time, Blake, and thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you follow him at Blake Byler 45. Blake, thanks so much for your time today, man.
Yeah, Joe, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's Blake Byler making all of us smarter, and we're going to round out our episode right there. I know we're a couple of days away from Alabama football getting started with fall camp, but I am just as excited about Alabama basketball season, so we appreciate Blake jumping on and joining us. Check out his piece from his conversation with Preston Murphy. Check out each of his newcomer breakdowns. He's got all 8 players, the 4 transfers, the 4 freshmen, all broken down right there at Alabama Crimson Tide on SI. We are powered by BamaCentral. As we get out of here for the day, we want to tell you one more time about our friend Derek Daniel. You can call him today at 205-758-3391 for all of your insurance needs. You know you need home, life, and auto insurance needs. That may not be enough. Make sure you get your boat insured, your trailer insured. Everything that's in your life needs to be insured, and Derek Daniel can take care of it. State Farm Insurance right here in Northport, Alabama. Call him today at 205-758-3391. 258-3391. You can go over your auto insurance, your homeowner's insurance, or even your life insurance as he takes care of you and your family's needs. Visit him today at 4604 Highway 69 North in Northport, Alabama, 35473. That's going to do it for our show today. We appreciate everybody watching us on the BamaCentral YouTube channel, watching us on my own social medias at Joe Gaither 6, or listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon.